Welcome to our webinar on navigating wicked problems. My name is Tony Carlton and I'm the Director of Corporate and Professional Education for the Macquarie Business School. The current pandemic is creating a number of unique challenges for us at the level of individual, team, organisation and society. Many of these challenges have little data and little precedent to help us decide what the best way forward is. These are indeed challenging and unstructured and very complicated problems. Mo Fox is going to give us an introduction to how we can address these wicked problems. Mo is an experienced practitioner and consultant in creative strategizing, with a track record assisting a number of large corporations in addressing their difficult strategic issues. Mo is also a highly experienced educator. For Macquarie Business School, Mo delivers short courses in solving wicked problems and design thinking. This webinar will be recorded and will be made available to all participants. We encourage you to use the chat function throughout the webinar, and there will be time at the end for you to explore questions raised. You might also want to minimise your speaker gallery, which should be on the top right hand of the screen, as we have a large group of participants on today's webinar. I would now like to hand over to Mo.
Thank you, Tony. Well, judging by the number of people who have registered for this webinar, thank you all for coming. The subject seems to be resonating at the moment. And I guess that's not really surprising given that we are in the middle of one of the most wicked problems we have experienced in these modern times. And the world has stopped as we try to figure out what the heck we're going to do about it and how we are going to deal with it. And you know, the thing is the dreaded lurgy and all the stuff that's going with it, it feels new because it's so in our face. But the reality is that we have actually been dealing with wicked problems forever. So if any of you have ever tried to have a relationship or raise children or craft a career for yourselves, you have been dealing with wicked problems. Or on a corporate scale or a business scale, anybody with a transformation program, they seem to be ubiquitous, or a restructure, or managing stakeholders, or culture programs, or innovation, or even just building a really high-performing team, you have been dealing with wicked problems. And those problems are still going to be here when the virus, the dreaded lurgy, has gone. On top of which, we are going to be dealing with a whole raft of new problems that will be left behind. I mean, we won't know the social and economic impacts of this for decades. And we're watching as industries fall over and other ones pop up out of the ground. We have no idea what the impacts are going to be, but we will still be reeling for some time to come. So we are swimming in them. And the thing is that this is where the stuff that is important to us lives. So we need to get better at the way we deal with it. And up until now, while we do okay, we don't do as well as we could have. And that's largely because we spend our time pretending that they are something else. We pretend that the wicked problems we have aren't as messy as they really are, that they are more controllable, that they're more logical, that they're more predictable. And as a result, we don't get the opportunity to work with them the way we could. We don't get the outcomes we could get. And we don't do as well generally as we need to if we're going to really thrive in this new volatile world. So we are so brainwashed, in fact, about this whole pretense piece, about thinking they're different kinds of problems, that when I have people coming to courses with me, like, so they are coming to a wicked problems course, and I ask them to bring in a couple of problems, right? A work problem, a business problem, a personal problem. Many, in fact, will actually look me in the eye and say, I don't have one. So I have to set them straight because they do. If you are human and if you are living in a social environment, I guarantee you are having wicked problems to deal with. So if you are like that, then I invite you to rethink it and embrace the wickedness that you have around you. And to think particularly of a wicked problem that you are dealing with at the moment, which may or may not have anything to do with Corona. So think of something so that you can track it as we go through. It may be something to do with living at home. You know, maybe you're trying to figure out how you're going to stay married at the end of the lockdown. Maybe it's you got a micromanaging boss. Maybe you want to figure out how you sell your kids on eBay. Maybe you're trying to get a promotion, get them to keep their rooms tidy, or maybe you're trying to get fit because it's the only way you can get outside at the moment. Whatever your wicked problem is, keep it in mind as we go through so that you'll get more out of the session that we have lined up for you today. So I am just going to take a minute to share my screen so that I can share some deeply thrilling drawings with you. And while I do that, just take a moment to think of the wicked problem that is doing your head in at the moment. Okay, so we are back. Right, here we are. Have you thought of one? Have you got one? Right about there, you're over there. Okay, the problem with wicked problems, as I said, is that we tend to pretend, let me just shift all my views around. The problem is that we tend to pretend that they are something that they are not. This isn't going to move. Okay. And so we deal with them fairly poorly. And at the moment, what's happening with the virus, coronavirus, is that it is basically amplifying all of the impacts of everything that we are doing. So if you have been dealing with them fairly well to date, then that's going to stand you in really good stead. But if you have been dealing with them poorly, then that is going to come around and bite you in the ass. So this is really an opportunity to change that and to get much better outcomes than the ones that we have been getting to date. To step back and to think about what matters most to us and why, and then how can we do those things better. Okay, so what we're going to go through today, you're seeing we're trying a sketching program to see if it works, so hopefully you will be thrilled by the art that you see. What we've seen today is basically a taster of the Wicked Problems program that we run at Macquarie Business School. And we're going to cover what makes a problem wicked, the 3 biggest mistakes that I see when I work with organizations, and these are fairly consistent, and the 3 flips that we can use. How do we flip those so that we can get much better results instantly? And I have a reminder here, which is to talk about the chat, which is we're going to have a question session at the end of the webinar for about 10 minutes. It would be really great if you could put the questions that you have into the chat box as we go so that we don't have a flurry at the end. So if you want to share as you go also what's going on for you, any of the wicked problems you're dealing with, I am sure you will find a whole pile of like-minded souls out there ready to empathize with you. Okay, so what is a wicked problem? Well, you will have been experiencing all of this in spades for the last month or so. And there are many, many characteristics to a wicked problem because it's so volatile and full of flux. But these are 6 of the top characteristics of wicked problems that I pretty much guarantee that you'll have been feeling in the last month or so. And have a check as we go through how many of these resonate for the problems that you have come up with on an individual basis. So first of all, they are full of ambiguity and unknowns. You know, for example, how long is this thing going to last? Can I get government assistance? How does the rental thing work? Why is it that I can't go and visit my mother, but I can go and get my hair cut? You know, all of this conflicting information, messiness and conflicting views, messiness, too much information, not knowing what's available, not knowing what we need to listen to, lots of conspiracy theories, all of that. Secondly, rapid change. There's an awful lot of change happening really quickly. I mean, look at the new legislations that are being put through and how fast they're going. Look at how you are changing how you spend your day. Look at your changing assumptions about how work works. Third, tangled interdependencies. You know, we're trying to make really big decisions based on a whole pile of things. You know, it depends on this, which depends on 5 other things, and those depend on 5 others. You know, the interdependencies with the economy versus health equation, for example, it's not easy to make a decision around those. You know, the governments are all struggling with it. Or do we keep the kids at home? And what's the impact on health workers and the elderly if we do? But, you know, what are the pros and cons? So it just makes it really, really messy. Stakeholders, loads of stakeholders, usually with very different opinions, very different points of view, agendas, motivations, very tangled. And that's what makes it such a subjective space. So wicked problems are really subjective and they are really personal. So that whole concept of, you know, it's not business, it's personal, rubbish. Everybody who's being impacted by this is being impacted personally. It doesn't matter how global the problem is. And the stakeholder could just be you, by the way. It could just be you trying to battle with your other half, better or worse half, to stop yourself going to the fridge every time you get distracted. You know, so anything around that. Changing beliefs, behaviors, and your sense of identity. If you are trying to change yours or anybody else's, it's likely to be wicked. So in this case, you know, what's your identity? How's your identity going when all of a sudden your work avatar and your home persona are being smashed together on a daily basis? So maybe one of them's a hard ass and the other one's a cute cuddly teddy bear. What does it do to your identity when the people in the other contexts are seeing you as a whole person? You know, what is it doing to your professional sense of self when you're showing up to work in pajama bottoms every day? So those are really important. And finally, there is no one right solution. And this one gets in the way of a lot. You know, in this case, when you're talking about a wicked problem, because it's entirely new territory, you cannot analyze your way to a correct solution. There are many possible solutions. There are many possible outcomes. And we won't know which ones work until after they have worked. So, you know, the classic example in this case is looking around the world and seeing how all of the different countries and governments are choosing to handle their approach to the virus. Everybody's taking a different strategy. And we won't really know which one was the most sound strategy for years to come. And even then, the tangled interdependencies mean you're not comparing apples with apples. So these are the 6 main characteristics. Now we're going to take and you will have experienced most of these. What I'm curious about is which one is doing your head in the most. So we're going to do a very quick poll, if that could come up now, please. Which one of these is doing your head in the most? So just pick one of them. Is it ambiguity? Is it changing? Is it too much change? Is it the tangled interdependencies? Is it loads of stakeholders, changing beliefs, behaviors, identity, the no right solution? Or, you know, in my case, I think it's a little bit of the overwhelm of dealing with all of them. But pick one and we'll close out in 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's finish the poll and see the results. And we have a winner with lots of ambiguity and unknowns. It's a killer, isn't it? I mean, we have such a hunger for certainty. You know, I have a friend with an illness at the moment. She doesn't know what it is. And that's what's, you know, she's fine as soon as if somebody could just tell her what's going on, then she could do something constructive about it. But at the moment, because it could be one thing, it could be something else, it's driving her insane. The ambiguity of this is hard. The ambiguity in the workplace is hard when you're getting mixed messages about something. Are we being kept on? Are we not being kept on? How long is this going to last? So our brains are wired to not like ambiguity. We like certainty. Ambiguity actually causes us pain. And it's one of the chief skills that we need to get used to if we're going to function well in this space. and be able to make decisions well when we don't have enough information and when we don't know what most of it means. Okay, because the thing is that this is a sense, and the ambiguity piece is important because what we tend to do when we're pretending it's a different kind of problem is pretend it's a logistics exercise when actually it's a sense-making exercise. Okay, so thank you. Let's move on from that. If we can have the poll, oh, I've got the poll down. All right, so this was my very bad visual pun to remind me to say, so how do we deal with this? How are we dealing with these problems currently? We are swimming in wicked problems, have been for years. Well, what are we currently doing? Well, in some cases, we're dealing with it really, really well. So, for example, the distilleries in Australia have responded to the virus by automatically turning around. And this is everybody from Carlton and United down to my local distillery, Manly Spirits, have turned around and stopped their normal production in order to make hand sanitizer, vast quantities of hand sanitizer, because that way they are supporting not only their customers, but their community in something that they need most. And it is not as if their business as usual wouldn't be doing fine, because it's not as if the demand for alcohol has gone down at all in the current crisis. Or that may just be in my household. Other examples of people doing well. Tony mentioned yesterday that there was this fantastic group out of Nashville called Larkin Poe, whose concerts have been canceled. So they have pivoted in order to do live streaming concerts for $10 a hit and to stream across the world. So, you know, that's a really cool switch. I remember Peter Gabriel doing something similar years ago when pirating became big, and he was losing masses of revenue from sales of albums, and all his attitude was, well, he just watches where the streaming is coming from and then he schedules a concert there. So many people are adapting and have adapted really well to these sorts of problems. But more often we don't, and we haven't. So more often what happens is that across any of those wicked kind of spaces like culture and change and innovation and mergers and, you know, engaging people, we end up with a roughly, you know, finger in the sky number of 75–80% fail rates. And that's made up of a whole pile of fairly conflicting numbers, like from 70% for change program fails to 96% for new grocery retail launch product launches. So we don't do it that well. And a lot of it comes down to pretending that these problems are something that they are not. So what are the mistakes that that mindset leads us to? What are the really common ones? Okay, so these are all interconnected and they all come from that illusion of trying to keep to a controlled environment. The first one, and remember, any questions as we go through, put them in the chat. The first one is that we try to manage the logistics and the mechanics of a problem rather than what it means to people. So here's somebody that can be happy. This is going to be not so happy, I think. Not so happy. Maybe we've got somebody up here. Very gung-ho. Okay, so we manage the mechanics and logistics as opposed to what it means. And this is a hangover from the Industrial Revolution and our love affair with Taylorism, where that kind of manufacturing model is so attractive because it reduces the ambiguity that we've all said we don't like, and it makes controlling the environment easier. And that approach is fantastic if you can actually control the environment. But when you're in a wicked space where it's about sense making, where there is so much ambiguity and things change all the time, that reductive process doesn't really work. So first thing is mechanics and logistics as opposed to what it means to people, which leads us to the second, which is we focus on the problem instead of the outcome. We focus on getting rid of what we don't want instead of creating what we do want. So what is the outcome we want? This can be, what are we trying to create? What are we trying to do differently? Because if we're just getting rid of what we don't want, that doesn't actually leave us with what we do want. It leaves us with no problem. So when you're working with a wicked problem, you actually have to flip that and create something that you do want, instead of just dealing with the symptoms, which takes us to the way that they actually do it, which is they plan and execute. I hope you like my gory blood. Instead of experimenting and adapting. Okay, so these are not udders. These, you often have to, if you're running a course with you, and a course with me, half of it is guessing what it is that I am drawing. These are test tubes, obviously, right? Obviously, and we'll have an orange one, oopsie, and we will have an orange one here. So when you are working with a wicked space where everything's new, where everything's in flux, you cannot just plan and execute as if everything's going to stay still and just wait for you to get to the end. It's not a manufacturing process, but we are so attached to certainty that we keep doing that. We have to flex, we have to adapt, we have to try things out and see what works, because with a wicked problem, you will not know what the right answer is, the solution is, until you've already done it and it's worked. So I'll give you an example that covers all three of these. A friend of mine, a colleague of mine, is a change manager working with a major financial institution, and they are putting through a huge IT project at the moment, as is not unusual. Now they're getting lots of motherhood statements from the top of the organization, but the sponsors of the project itself are being really hard ass about it. And they are insisting with zero leniency that all the KPIs and milestones be met as per the strategy document. And they're doing this in spite of the fact that their entire diverse team is now working from home under different and not sometimes traumatic circumstances, that they are not used to collaborating online. So there's this whole thing going on, and they're trying to make sense of what's going on for them and of the rest of their lives and their families. And despite the fact that the team can get no inputs from any of the rest of the organization because they're all in the same spot, and that they can get no approvals, and that the objectives, you know, what they're trying to achieve in the first place has totally changed. So you look at that, but they're so determined to make sure that it's business as usual because that shows the professionalism and there will be no leniency, that they're not flexing with it. So how successful do you think that project is going to be? Okay, so how have you seen those three, the logistics, focusing on the problem, and planning and executing instead of flexing, how do you see those show up in yours? In the problem that you have? Comments, as always, in the chat box as we move into flipping those, and how can we look at them differently so that we might get some different results. Okay, so how do we flip them? Because this is what we want to know. How do we flip ourselves so that we are going from that reductive approach of planning and executing, getting rid of the ambiguity, closing the problem down to get to the right answer, which doesn't exist, to opening up the space, to becoming more curious, more flexible, even more playful in how we deal with things? Well, the fastest way of opening a space up is to ask some really good questions. So that is what we are going to do. And the first question that we are going to ask is, and you can use these questions immediately to get better value out of any of your work problems, but also any of the home wicked issues that you are dealing with. So the first question that we want to ask is, what does the problem mean? What does it mean? And this is not just, covers the big picture. So what does it mean? What are the implications? From a big picture point of view, so, you know, what does it mean to various industries like the events management industry or travel industry, which are all kind of falling over themselves at the moment? What does it mean to education? What does it mean to your business as you run through all the scenarios that you're doing? There's one company that I know of that is so concerned with finding the certainty to be able to make the right decision that they are running literally hundreds of scenarios with different variables just so that they can see what the likelihood is going to be so that they can mitigate the risk as they go forward. So big picture, what does it mean? What does it mean to the future of work? But also, what does it mean emotionally? You know, what does working from home mean? How is it going to affect your relationship? What does it mean to, how do you stay functional in a scenario like this, a lockdown scenario, if you're an extrovert and you actually need to have physical contact with people on a regular basis? What does it mean? And this is the question that we forget to ask, and it completely stymies a lot of the results that you're likely to get. Because for some people, this situation may be catastrophic. For other people, it's going to be a massive opportunity. For some people, it's just, you know, business as usual, but slightly different. And for some, it's a mix of all three. But whatever it means, they're going to have to process that before they do anything else that's really functional. And I remember doing a major program with a government body a couple of years ago, and they had just gone through a massive restructure and let a whole pile of people go. So it was traumatic for the group. And I was asked to run a series of programs for them that were helping their people to become better at business development, which none of them wanted to do, surprisingly enough. And I remember I chatted to the sponsor of the first one, but this happened with every other one as well. I chatted to the sponsor of the first one and said, so how's the team going? You know, where are they at? How are they dealing with the situation? Well, they were a bit upset, but no, they were focused and professional, and they were dead keen on getting on with it, and they knew they needed the skills, and rah, 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 rah. Well, rubbish, frankly, absolute rubbish. I rocked up to give this course, and within 15 minutes, it became completely apparent that nobody wanted to be there, and that, frankly, nobody was going to listen to anything until we had discussed the current situation, even though they had done nothing but for weeks and they'd been going in circles. So we ended up doing about 2 hours worth of essentially business therapy and listening and understanding and letting them have their vent, and for them to be able to express what it meant to them before they could settle and then be open to listening to anything else that we were going to do, and even see how it was going to help them through the situation they were trying to grapple with. So we see it all the time, but we don't allow for that venting, we don't allow for that piece enough, and yet it's the thing that determines most of our outcomes. In fact, I've got a question for you. Thinking of the problem that you have in mind, that you've kept in mind throughout this, how much of your success depends on other people? How much of your success depends on people? Because I guarantee it's pretty high. And the reason this is important, so important to know, is that if you're dealing with a wicked problem, about 99% of what you are doing is going to be stakeholder management. And it's why we spend so much time on the course just doing that. So it's never about what your problem is, it's what your problem means to people. And that's what determines the decisions they make and the actions they take, however contradictory or unpredictable they may seem to you. So you've got to understand the motivations. What does it mean? Most important question. Second question is, what do we want to create? Remember, it's not about the problem. It's about what we want to bring into the world. That's what this is going to be. Okay, so what do you want to bring into the world? Or how do you, this is Australia, do you recognize it? I have to put Tasmania in because they get crabby, and so does New Zealand. And there's stuff in Asia, and I think, okay, so what do you want to bring into the world? How do you want the world to be different as a result of whatever you're doing? What do you want to contribute? What new world do you want to create? So what do you want to create? And at this point, it's about time we reframed the concept of what a solution is. Because with a wicked space, there is no one right solution. So if you're going to solve a wicked problem, there are many possible solutions because it's new. So there are many things that you could do. So you have to start thinking about possible solutions, possible outcomes, because you can create great outcomes with a wicked problem. You can turn a failing company around, rescue a marriage, pull somebody out of depression. You can launch new products, create new markets, start new fabulous relationships, raise fabulously happy kids. You can do amazing things, but they are not solutions. So we need to get rid of that that binary thing of a problem has a solution. Okay, what do you want to create? What do you want? And that is actually a kind of a hard question because most people don't know. So what kind of an organization do you want to be? What do you want to be known for? What do you want in your own life? What does success really mean to you now? This is a chance to step back and spend some time really thinking about that so that when you go into making mode, you can make something that really matters. Okay, so what does it mean? What do you want to create? And finally, the third flip, what can you try? What can you try? Because you are in new and uncharted territory with a wicked problem. So you are navigating, you are wayfinding. You got to try stuff and get the feedback from that in order to find a way forward. A company did this really well. I was working with doing a pile of design thinking with a utilities company, and they needed to buy a pile of drones in order to do some field work. And what they did, instead of going through the whole business process of, you know, the business plan down to the right answer, taking 9 months and lots of money, was actually just go out and buy a drone, go out into the field with plenty of people from lots of different departments, and they played with it. You know, they tried it out. They sent it off. Could it do A? Yes, it did. That's awesome. Okay, can it do the other thing we want it to do? No, not so much. But that gave them an idea. Could it possibly do this thing? And they tried it, and it did. And they spent the whole afternoon playing and running experiments. One of the experiments that they ran, sending it up and down the lines, actually saved them enough money to pay for the drone itself. And even though they didn't buy those drones, what they found out was that they had a much better idea of the specs. They knew what they needed to do. They had a better idea of the scope. So when they did go to buy the technology and spend all the money, they were spending it on something that was going to work well for them because they had already tried it out. So it was a huge risk mitigation for them just by going out and playing. So what do? I would suggest that in the situation that you're thinking of, your current problem, think of 3 really simple tests that you can run. Really cheap, really simple, free, $50, maybe $100. And if it works, if the test works, do more of it. Awesome. If the test sucks and you get lousy results, also awesome. Do something else. You're navigating, okay? So, we are final calls for questions at the moment because we are going to switch over to answering questions. So it's the last call. Right, so what does it mean? The 3 questions, what does it mean? What do you want to create? And what can you try? And how can you, whoopsie, we needed a question mark, it doesn't matter, you don't get a question mark. And how can you use those questions to really open up your problem space? How can you use them to become more curious and more fluid and more playful with the mess that you're going to inevitably have to deal with? Okay, I'm going to stop screen sharing now, and we are going to hand over to some questions. Okay, what have we got?
We have a number of questions. Thanks for sending those through, everyone. The first one comes from Narelle. Are there any tips on managing executioners and converting them to conducting experiments?
Oh, man. Yeah, I usually start with there's a rationale behind the experiment. So this is pure cost, okay? If you are I love that phrase. I'm going to steal it, Narelle. That's brilliant. If you have executioners, what tends to happen is you have to commit at that point to a lot of money, because this is the execution thing is standard. So what happens is you come up with the idea, you buff it up, and then you launch or you execute, and then you find out after you have spent all the money that it doesn't work. So basically what you have done is run an incredibly expensive experiment, right? So if you're converting them, I think I'd do it with questions, and I would probably pan out to see, well, what is it roughly going to cost us to do this? And can we afford that if the fail rate is going to be likely to be around 80%? And what would it cost to mitigate this by coming up with a whole pile of, why don't we try this out first and try this out first and try this out first? So you've got a financial argument for that. Design thinking is really good for that. So doing a lot of prototyping up front to figure out how to spend your money at the other end is, it's a straight logical financial argument. And once they start trying it and they can see whether things work or not, if you get to run a few experiments on the side, it just proves itself. It proves the value of it to itself. What they don't like is that it's not on the certainty timeline. So you have to build it into the way that you do the timeline piece. And sometimes you have to take it offline and come back in with the results and prove them that way.
Great. The next question comes from Charles, and that question is, what is the best way to ensure fast and decisive decision-making in a wicked problem world? That is, to avoid analysis paralysis or indecisiveness as the information just keeps changing. Thanks, Charles. That's a good one.
Can you say the beginning bit again?
What is the best way to ensure fast and decisive decision making in a wicked problem world to avoid analysis paralysis?
Okay. This almost goes back to the last. Part of this is about changing your mindset and what you're expecting. So if you can get over the fact that you are trying to find the right answer, I mean, really, this is the biggest block, is people trying to get it right. And the analysis paralysis comes from people trying to get to the right answer. So the biggest flip that you can make that will allow you to do this well is accepting that you don't know and that there is no right answer. And that instead of trying to control the situation, you've got to be playful. You've got to play with the possibilities. You've got to, play with the people that you're with. So the biggest shift that you can make is running experiments. You're in ambiguity. So you're in a wicked space. There is nothing right. What are small tests that you can run to allow you to wayfind? Again, it's did that work? Awesome. Did that suck? Awesome. Do something else. You've got to test your way through. You've got to act your way through. So it's lots of little decisions rather than getting it right and everybody having to agree on the right thing, because they won't agree and there is no right answer. I hope that helps.
Great. So there's been a lot of questions about budgets, obviously, with this with this time that we have. So being flexible and testing ideas costs money. Haley wants to know, how do you balance that in a time when budgets are so tight, being flexible and testing ideas?
It depends on what your... Okay, sorry, my brain went off into about 5 different directions then, Haley. It depends on what you're testing. So make the tests small. The tests can be, a test can be a conversation. A test can be getting 5 people together to discuss something. It can be mocking something up. I mean, one of the challenges I would give all of you in terms of when you're running the tests is how cheaply and quickly, and you want quick and dirty. You want cheap and quick and dirty. So how do you just do enough and make it simple enough to get an idea and break it down into the little component parts? Somebody trying to do a whole new entry system for a business would break it down into, well, here's the entry screen and do it on cards, as opposed to actually put a program together. They will talk to people and play act it. None of this costs any money. So, I mean, it depends on the project that you're running, but the challenge is to how can you break it into discrete units? And the argument is, again, you know, it costs money, but it costs more money to do something that doesn't work and do it at scale, because you are going to spend a fortune on something that doesn't work. So again, it's, yeah, how do you mitigate the risk by spending little bits up front to make sure that when you do spend some money, it's going to count. The budgets thing is hard. Really get ingenious, get creative, do it dirty. In New York, there's a film that I often show of Jeanette Sadik Khan, who did a whole pile of infrastructure redoing in New York, including closing off Times Square, which is huge, right? And the tests that they ran were literally painting surfaces cheaply over a weekend, putting bollards in, putting cheap furniture in. They set it up to see if it would work, and if it did, then they could go and spend some money making it permanent. And it bypassed all of the approval and the bureaucracy that you get in a government situation. So, you know, maybe you have a session with your team to figure out how could you find, get really clear about what's the thing you need to know and what the test is doing, and then what's the cheapest, dirtiest way you could get an indication as to whether you're in the right direction or not.
Okay, so we've got time just for a last couple of questions. One is, what happens when there is not a solution to a wicked problem? That's from Kim.
Ooh, well, okay, so A, there is not a solution to your wicked problem. As we have said, there is no solution, one right solution. And sometimes the problems are so big anyway, it would be ludicrous to think that there's a solution. Example. Homelessness, we're dealing with that at the moment. So homelessness, you cannot, you know, it would be nice to think we could solve homelessness. It's unlikely that we're going to be able to. So you look at an organization like Wayside Chapel, a fabulous organization if you don't know it, working out of King's Cross and I think Bondi. They basically deal with the homeless, right? And they call their people, the people that come to see them, they don't call them clients, they call them visitors. And their whole intention is around making life better for them. So the thing is that we tend to go into this judgmental phase where we see things as being right or wrong or good or bad. But with a wicked problem, there is no such thing. Things are either useful or not useful, and you can only make them better or worse. So what they do is, instead of trying to fix homelessness, they concentrate on making the experience of the homeless people as good as possible. And they start with zero judgment. They meet them where they're at. They say that they see them as people to be met, not, what's the phrase, not problems to be solved. Gorgeous. And what, you know, maybe they're providing a shower, maybe they're giving them a haircut. There's a guy that runs a salon in one of the bathrooms there every week to cut people's hair, you know, to make them feel good and give them some dignity and allow them to go and seek work. Or they give them legal advice or a hot meal or just a sense of community or somebody to listen to them. And, you know, you look at something like that, they're not trying to solve the problem. There is no solution, and they certainly couldn't solve it anyway. They're not in a position to, but man, they can make it better. So are they creating value? Huge value, huge value. I could give you loads more examples, but that's one that really resonates with me. I hope that answers it.
Yeah, and our last question for the day is from Delasha, who asks, how can I learn more about the frameworks you mentioned?
Well, I guess the obvious thing is come to the course, because you'll experience them in full. Or, you know, I think we're going to send out a whole pile of resources, including some videos and articles that I have written. If you want to go to my website, I have articles and videos, and I'm going to release a book shortly. Really, the frameworks that I use stuff from all over the place. I have developed a whole pile of frameworks, which are the ones that I teach, because I have created them after a couple of decades of seeing what works and what doesn't in different organizations, and these are tried and tested. But if you have that fluid mindset, then you can use pretty much any strategic framework that you have. And if you are using it with a creative mindset, if you are not executing, if you are not doing that reductive thing, then that can become a wicked tool. And the other obvious one is, you know, design thinking. And there's loads. I mean, I run a course with Macquarie Business School on design thinking, come to that. But there is, you know, there's so much information online on that at the moment in terms of the design thinking framework. I find that design thinking works brilliantly if you are doing products and processes and services. And sometimes there's a bit of a gap when it comes to behavior change sometimes. So I prefer using the stuff that I've developed for that. But come along or have a look on my website and there will be more.
Wonderful, and that's all for the questions.
Cool. Well, thank you for sending questions in. I really appreciate it. It's nice to have some to play with at the end of the day and to make me think. So I'm going back with what you've given me. We are surrounded by wicked problems. As you can see, as we've discussed, they are the things that matter most to us. That's where the things that matter to us live, you know, our relationships, our careers, our sense of identity, our culture. And we need to be more effective with them. We need to stop being executioners and to learn to work with them and to be more playful. We need to be curious and open to ask things like, what does it mean? What do we need to create? What can we try? And to stop executing and start playing and reveling in the mess that we have. So it's a wicked, wicked world. Have fun with it. And thank you. Over to you, Tony.
Thanks, Mo, for unpacking those challenging ideas. And thank you also, everyone, for your great participation in the chat room. If you are interested in further understanding how to address wicked problems, there are a number of resources available, as Mo mentioned. In our follow-up email, we'll include a recording of this webinar, and we'll also include links to some of the other resources that are available. In conclusion, I'd like to thank everyone for attending today, and particular thanks to Mo for her insights. Keep your eye out for our future webinars and virtual short courses. Otherwise, I hope you all keep well and stay wicked. Thank you.